Hello and welcome to the Danielle Noonan podcast, where I interview founders and innovators to learn inspiring human stories behind their game-changing work. Today's guest is the utterly brilliant Sharmadean Reid MBE, a serial founder and author. Sharmadean started her life studying at Central St Martin's before becoming a successful stylist and creative consultant. She then started Wah Nails, a pioneering nail salon in East London, before she launched Beautystack, a beauty tech startup. And now she is founder and CEO of the Stack World, a global media platform and community for women. In this conversation today, Sharmadean talks me through her life and career journey, from being the curious young girl in Wolverhampton with high aspirations to the powerful woman she became, the lessons she has taken from all of her businesses to life, and her new book, New Methods for Women, a Manifesto for Independence, a book which I consider to be the new Bible for women. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Sharmadean Reid. Sharmadean, I always like to start all my interviews by going back in time. So I wanted to ask you, what were you like growing up? And what would you say were some childhood experiences which possibly shaped you?
I love talking about being a child. I was so happy, so curious, engaged. I actually asked my family about this recently because I have been preparing for my season 2. And in order to do that, I did this process of 10 weeks to transform your life, where I effectively wrote a course for myself. And one of the sessions was remember what you loved as a child. So talking to your aunties and, family and cousins about what were you like as a child is a really good way to connect with yourself and who you are and what you're always into. And what I heard from my family was that I was chatty, I was curious, I was always asking questions. I was a little bit of a natural overachiever. So, I never felt like I worked hard, but I just loved being busy or productive or making things. I'd always find things to do. I was never bored. I grew up in Wolverhampton, big family. You're kind of left to your own devices some of the time, and there were always cousins and other children to play with. And I would do anything from make mud pies to write a play, paint pictures. I was just a very happy child.
I love that. And I always love asking the question because it's always so interesting looking back to see how people evolve. And there's so much of, I think, like what you said when you asked your family what you were like. I actually did a similar thing. I think it was possibly around the same age as well. I think I was just turning 40. And I remember reaching out to some really old childhood friends and saying, what do you remember about me? Because I've got this feeling, and I've had it for a while, that unless we die, we don't actually hear good things about ourselves. And I'd kind of lost my way a bit around 40, and I'd forgot what I was like. And I had also forgotten what brought me joy. And that was really important. I wanted to find out. So I was asking people what they could remember about me. And I found it really grounding. So I think it's a wonderful thing to do. I've heard you say before that since you were 12, that you had a vision of your future, which I thought was rather amazing, because when I was 12, I definitely wasn't looking into the future at all. So I want to ask you, what was that vision that you had when you were 12?
Well, I'm a big believer that whatever you were doing between the ages of 12 and 15 is really your noble purpose or your higher calling. And between the ages of 12 and 15, I was reading a lot of fashion magazines, watching a lot of art movies, a lot of foreign films and independent cinema. I loved cable TV. I was obsessed with it. And my vision for my future was an amalgamation of all of these things. I thought I would be in media or film, fashion, that I would be in a city, in the big city working. And I thought that I would just be out and about. I remember writing a letter to myself when I was 15 for myself at 19. Because when you're young, you think 19 is really old. So this letter was you're living in London, you're shopping at Harvey Nichols, you're doing all of this stuff. which is so funny because at 19, I was just a poor student, but I guess I was kind of writing it for what I thought I would be like at 30. And, you know, I just knew I would be somebody and be doing stuff.
I love that because I think, we'll talk further on in the interview about your book and there's a lot about manifestation. And I really believe that a lot of manifestation has really worked for you. But one thing where you were saying there about cable TV, I love this bit in your book, New Methods for Women. You say, it was the 1980s. Anyone could win, even me, just a little girl in Wolverhampton, which I loved because you were talking about, the fact that you had cable TV meant you got all these programs that you could watch. A lot of them, I guess, were American. And there was, I don't know if I'm assuming it was partly Dallas and Dynasty and all these really powerful, amazing
what
women.
It was. Bold and the Beautiful.
But I think this is why people don't realize that actually, media, full stop, social media, traditional media, it can be such a power for good in the right hands with the right lens. And if you've got the right role models, because, sometimes you can watch films. And I remember, who was it that did it? Who's in that film with Susan Sarandon where they go off the cliff in the car? Thelma and Louise. Yeah, well, I can't remember.
I actually rewatched Gina Davis. I actually rewatched that just the other day for the first time.
So funny.
Sorry, I didn't rewatch it. I'd never had watched it. I watched it for the first time just a few weeks ago. And Gina Davis is such an interesting and amazing character because she was a real character on my TV screen in the 80s and 90s. And she has since founded a Center for Gender in Media Studies. She actually runs an organization that compiles data on the amount of women you see on the screen. If they're on the screen, what are they talking about? What are they doing? Are they good role modeling? And I think her experience and of how she was treated as an actress has really, really shaped what she thinks is important as the role of media, like you said, being a powerful good. And I read an interview with her in the Gentlewoman magazine, and she talks about how Susan Sarandon, because she was a little bit older, was very protective of Gina Davis on set. The director would say, oh, take your top off in this scene. And Susan would be like, Gina is not taking her top off in this scene. And I just love that because, like you said, film and TV is absolutely powerful for role modeling. And I always say that my desire or my belief that I could be anything I wanted to be was from Thatcher, Oprah, and Madonna. Those women basically ruled, even if I didn't see them directly, like, not seeing Thatcher directly, the ripple effect of, nation of shopkeepers, anyone can be an entrepreneur, individualism, ownership, be liberated, be sexual. I was very much a 1984 baby.
Which would have obviously shaped you because I was born just a bit before you, but those were the same kind of three role models that I had. But also talking about Gina Davis, what was really interesting is exactly what you said there, is one of the things that her data was able to reveal is how much time women get on screen and then how much is dialogue, like how much of that time is women talking. And I thought I'd never, ever thought about film in that way. I'd never thought about the lack of role models, nor had I thought about, well, do we have role models? And if so, what parts are they playing? What's their dialogue? So it is so fascinating, but it's also a good discussion to have now because obviously we talk about social media, but we are in the age of the internet. And this is why I'm so adamant that we share more stories of women, because I think that the more we share, like you said, this little child in Wolverhampton will look up and go, well, that classic, if she can do it, I can do it, which is exactly what we want. This leads on nicely to your book, The New Methods for Women, which I thought was excellent. And I want to ask you, you've obviously had several businesses. One of the first ones you did was War Nails, which was a nail salon. Then Beautystack, which I know that you did up until the pandemic when things went a bit awry. And now it's the Stack World, which is a media platform and community for women. What drove you to be an entrepreneur? And what would you say are the most important lessons that you've learned from each startup that you've had?
Well, a big realization about writing the book and turning 40 that I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur. For the last 15 years, which was when I started War Nails, I've been pushed into this world of entrepreneurship, hustle culture, productivity, girl bossing, because it's a very neat story. It's a very sellable story. And before I started One L, people don't know or they forget. I was a creative, I was a stylist, I made little films. I was doing all the things that I thought I would be doing at 12. You asked me what I thought my vision for my future was at 12, and at no point in my reply did I say to you, business owner. And for me, I kind of got diverted off a path that I designed for myself since I was a child. And it was very easy for me to be swept in that path because it comes with this idea of money and power and status, and all of those things are attractive when you grow up with nothing, and when you didn't have much, or like you're a poor student. But I just think of myself as like a founder and a starter of things. Like, I wanted to start salon as a community space for me and my friends. I was heavily into hip hop and streetwear culture. There were lots of options for male streetwear shops. There were no options for women's kind of spaces for that same community. There still really isn't today. And that's why I opened my nail salon. I didn't open it to be like, I'm going to open a chain of nail salons and start a nail product line and be a businesswoman. I just wanted a shop in Dalston, but I just kept getting thrust into bigger, better, more, do this pop-up, do that, like do this product line. And, when I look back at that period in my life, it was so much fun and I loved it. And I wish I still had that salon today, to be honest. But I think of myself as a piece of wood floating in a choppy sea, just going along with whatever anyone asked of me. And, it was really stressful because I was carrying this weight of doing all of the things that I didn't really enjoy doing. And I don't even know if I was that good at it. Like, I'd never ran a company before. I'd never had staff before. All of these different things. And I also had a baby, and then I had a separation. And I started that business when I was 25. And by 28, literally 3 years later, I was having crazy panic attacks. It was like too much. So, a big part of this journey, my personal journey, a big part of New Methods is being like, why did I carry on down the path? Why was I a willing participant in capitalism, in patriarchy? Why did I go from one business to the next business to the next business? And it felt like I was just on this hamster wheel that I couldn't get off, because when I look back at all the times I wanted to quit, I'll tell you now, I wanted to quit my nail salon 6 months after it opened, because I was like, whoa, 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 I did not sign up for this. I thought I was having a nail shop for me and my friends, and the New York Times wrote about us, and we were in Sunday Times Style, and it was just blowing up. And I was like, oh my goodness, I did not sign up to sit in my bedroom on a Sunday afternoon designing a rota for my nail staff. I was like, this is too much for a 25-year-old. I wanted to shut it down, but that was my first experience of, well, I can't shut it down because people will think I've failed. And I can't shut it down because, I've got customers. And then I would say that the pressure of societal expectations, the pressure of media and public shame, and the pressure of other people and, the expectations the business community have of you, that's when I started to feel my life is not my own. And I would say that has been the last 15 years. My life is not my own. And now, post 40, and with the book finished and closing this chapter of my life, I'm like, how can I reclaim my life as my own? Part of the book, in fact, the biggest part of the book, is really truly understanding why I was motivated to do it. Human motivation and why we do anything is complex, but I had to do 10 years of self-reflection. And that is what the essays of the book are. They're 10 years of reflections and experiments. I had to do 10 years of work to realize I was raised in a single parent family, and I had this feeling of my absent father, of not being wanted. I can only rely on myself. I need to prove myself. I need to protect myself financially. All of these different things that stem from having this absent father. and also a mother who was very young. She was a child herself when she gave birth to me. So, this subconscious driving force of I can only rely on myself, therefore I need to make lots of money and I need to be secure and I need to have lots of power and status in order to protect myself. I didn't know at the time, but that was definitely a huge driving force for why I stayed on that bloody wheel.
It's interesting. I was going to ask you actually where your drive comes from. And I hadn't really thought about the fact you did literally go from one business to another. And some of that time was raising money, which is an additional stress. Obviously, you said you had a young child, which is an additional stress. There's many facets to your career and the route that you took, which doesn't always get shown because, I followed you for a long time on Instagram and it obviously does look to the outsider as a glamorous life, going to an event or like, I remember, I think you partnered with ASOS, didn't you? And you've done collaborations with Nike, and there's all this work that's gone into your career. And yet to read and hear from you say that, it was some of the toughest times it's quite hard. But I think women need to hear it because I think that's another thing that some women coming up are thinking, well, entrepreneurship is the way out of this patriarchy because I don't then have to be answerable to someone else, which is not always the case, as we know. What would you say?
Can I talk about that actually? Because I think
go for it.
I've been reflecting on that a lot lately. And even me just retelling, those 15 years makes me really emotional thinking about it because I was having a good time when I was making and creating. The difference with, general girl bossing culture is that I didn't go and do an MBA or I went to art school and the people I knew before I entered the business world were creatives, artists, ravers, musicians. That was my world. And I got thrust into this business world and I had to effectively really lose my personality and lose the things that like made me me. Like I never wore blazers and stuff like that. I lived in like trainers, like Air Max, you know what I mean? So quashing that part of your spirit, you can only do that for so long. So on this entrepreneurship as a means out of the patriarchy, I've been thinking about this a lot, which is going back to the 80s that we were talking about and this process of self-actualization through capitalism or through economic empowerment. Women have been doing that since the 80s, right? So since you have women's liberation in the 70s, since you have the pill in the 60s, women are like, well, actually, I now have more freedom in order to self-actualize. And in the 80s, you had, power women, power suits, power bitches, going to work, going to Wall Street. In the 90s, it was all about girl power, ladette culture, Spice Girls. And in the 2000s, in the noughts, it then goes into girl boss and leaning culture. And it's these two things. It's like, if you want to self-actualize and if you want to escape the patriarchy, there's only two ways for you to do it: entrepreneurship and leadership. And both of those, rely on you entering a capitalist system without the support required for you to not be working 2 or 3 or 4 times as hard as everybody else because of the unpaid labor you have to do. So if entrepreneurship and leadership are currently the only options to you and neither of them are working out because we've seen how leaning culture doesn't work, 99% of women, entrepreneurship leaves women being burnt out or cancelled or whatever, entrepreneurship for women isn't working right now either. What is the third option and what is the third way? And that's what I'm kind of in a process of discovering now. It's like, is there a different way for me to exist in this world and to feel fulfilled and that I'm reaching my highest potential without everything being about business and work? How is that possible while still maintaining my economic security? Because this is still important to me to be able to create that generational wealth. And I just think we don't have role modeling for that. We don't have role modeling for what is the alternative. If you don't want to be a leader because you'll be lonely and depressed, you don't want to be an entrepreneur because you'll be lonely and depressed. Like, what's what are the alternatives?
What do you think they are? As in, because I've never even thought about it like that, but you're absolutely right. It's like we push people into a direction, like you said, with the girl bossing and all the rest of it. But actually, the person that came up with that phrase, didn't have a good time, didn't enjoy it, and has spoken out about how the fact that she regrets writing the book and everything else, because at the end of the day, her business got sold. And I don't think it was even something that, she wanted, because obviously she'd taken investment and things went wrong from there. But what do you think? What in an ideal world, what does the alternative look like?
So I'm very early in my thinking, but my third way is around ownership and how we have recurring and passive revenue through creativity and ownership to create new models for living where we don't have to work as hard and we still get paid as much. So one of the essays that I'm writing, which is like a bonus essay out of the book, is always ask for equity. And I'm thinking about how startup equity or commission or royalties or intellectual property or land, these are all things that create passive income. And women don't participate in these things, for a complex set of reasons. Don't participate as much in financial products, don't participate as much in the pension. There are all of these things in terms of ownership, in terms of assets. I think it's why Rihanna doesn't have to make another album. She owns Fenty. If Rihanna did not own Fenty Beauty, she would have to be in the studio, hustling, working, just like everyone else out there. And I think it's really interesting because you have all of these celebrities making celebrity beauty brands. And it's not simply that they want to partake in a omni-channel personal brand. It's a protective mechanism, because having a company that you own as a musician is way more powerful than being in debt almost forever to record labels, which is why that system hasn't been working. I think about women as landlords, or women in rural parts of the world where owning land and being able to farm that land is key. So I'm really interested in how ownership for women is a positive next step in them working less and earning more. You still have to put in the beginning part, the rocket fuel to get you off the ground. But then once that thing is done, how do you make it pay you forever?
I love that. There's that Naval Ravikant quote. He's always talking about make money where you can earn while you sleep. And I think that's something that a lot of men, like you said, have mastered and women haven't. And there's so much that women can do. I was just thinking about all the kind of, I hate to use the phrase tech bros, but there's a lot of guys online who will build something, whether it's a podcast, a business or whatever. We know obviously that for many reasons they find it much easier. And then on top of that, they'll then sell like their ways of doing it. And a woman would never think about doing that, I don't think. I mean, besides you, I don't think there are many women that would have success in one field, whether it's podcasting or business, and then, package that up and then sell that.
I think a lot of women do that. I think that there's a massive industry of ebooks and courses and things like that. But I think that for me is a good start. Like, a good start is buy my course on XYZ, because you make it once, you own it, and then it sells forever, theoretically, right? But even then, there's something about your visibility, which is like, one of the essays in the book is calculate the cost of your visibility. I'm like, how can I create amazing intellectual property that then means I get residuals forever? Like, I'm fascinated by business case studies of things like Hello Kitty. You've got this one icon that pays billions. That Hello Kitty has generated billions since the creator created it. J.K. Rowling generated billions since she made Harry Potter. Taylor Swift now owns her own masters, makes a ton of money directly to her. Beyonce owns her own company, Parkwood Entertainment. It's like the front might look the same. So you might look at an artist and think, oh, they're both pop stars, but one pop star, I don't know, owns a piece of a skyscraper and another doesn't. And that just means they're not the same.
Mm.
You know,
That's
when
a really good point.
when I look back, right, I've actually been fascinated by this since I was 16. And I can think of two really clear images that I held in my head when I was 16. I read somewhere that Jennifer Lopez, who came out when I was 16, I think with their first album, she had invested in shooting her own calendar. So she got the photographer, the studio, the makeup artist, the hairstylist, because she wanted to own her own calendar. And this was in the 90s when calendars were very popular, like Pirelli calendar, you know, all those calendars.
Mm.
She made her own calendar and she owned every single penny of every, you know, that was earned off that calendar. She didn't license her image. She didn't get paid $1,000 and then never see another penny. She made her own calendar. And I remember at 16 thinking, wow, that's a good idea, isn't it? You make it and you own it. And then another one was watching Oprah and seeing the end credits of the Oprah Winfrey Show, where this little animated version of Oprah is pulling a trolley that says Harpo. And something just clicked in my brain. Oh, that's Oprah backwards. She must own this show. And that is why Oprah is a billionaire. And then all the other chat show hosts are just chat show hosts. Because even though she looks on the front foot the same, i.e., here are two chat show hosts in the 80s and 90s, she actually owned her own show and she syndicated that show. And that's when her wealth started to take off. So I'm curious about these role models. Where is the Harvard case study for Taylor Swift owning her masters? I want to read that.
One of the things that you said in the book is play games you can win. And you said that choosing an easy path didn't mean I didn't work hard. It just meant that my shots were mainly on target because I knew exactly how to kick the ball. Can you explain that? Because I think that is really interesting.
Yeah, like I say in the essay, I feel like there's this thing that if we didn't struggle, we don't deserve it. And I do think that comes from a history of mythology around women and shame and having to experience pain, and pain just being a part of who we are and how we live. You know, women, the pain that we have of menstruating or giving birth is just a kind of heartbeat for all types of pain that we might have to experience in our lives. And I think struggling and working is one of those. And it just kind of occurred to me that it's okay to be relaxed and it's okay to get what you want and actually be paid a good chunk of money for it, if that is your expertise and that is your knowledge. We are in a knowledge economy, and I often see on social media like memes saying, when you're paid for an hour's amount of knowledge work, it's not the hour that you're charging for. It's all of the years and years and years that you've been practicing, building, thinking, learning, you know, up until this moment. So you're worth it. With Play Games You Can Win, that essay is really about urging the reader to reflect on where their personality fits their work and what the highest price they can charge for that is. So as an example, I knew really early on in my journey that I wasn't good at detail or craft or patience as a work thing. As in, if I wanted to make something for fun, you know, make a quilt, make a tablecloth, I'll start doing it. And then I'll just, you know, after initial burst of effort, I'll kind of get a bit bored and do something else. So therefore, I knew that being a fashion designer wasn't the career path for me, because I'm never going to sit there and finish an entire collection. But I loved the pictures. I loved the behind the scenes. I loved the business, the knowledge. So I knew that doing my degree was a better choice. And it's really about matching what you're good at, what your personality suits to your career in order to feel like every day is not a work day. Kind of goes back again to what I was doing as a small child, which is I was always busy, but I never felt like any of it was work. I was always making stuff, never felt like it was work. Even my homework, I loved doing my homework in a creative way, so it didn't feel like work. So yeah, play games you can win is, don't be like a piece of driftwood like me, just going along with the flow. Actually actively start to look at your career and take control of your career and think, what am I best suited for? I think we're super lucky in this day and age that anyone can basically get paid for anything. So if you're like, actually, I just love chatting all day, chatting to my friends, think about how you can turn that into your job and turn that into your career. So you're always going to win and it never feels like work.
Love it. That's exactly how it should be. Another thing, I mean, there's a few quotes that I pulled out, which I thought were really good. One that was quite early on, which really struck me, was you said that it's not our fault and it never was. I can prove it to you, which when people read the book, they'll totally understand what that's about. What do you hope women get from the book?
With that quote and that, section heading, I guess I kept thinking how women do all the things they were told to do, like we said, 80s babies, go get it, go for it, work hard, hustle. And you do all of these things and it's still not working. And you're like, well, it must be me. It must be me. Something must be wrong with me. That's why I'm not getting the promotion that I ought to get, or I'm not getting funded, or whatever it is. And in that section, I'm trying to help the reader understand how there is this entire systemic experience that means that you are trying to push a rock up a hill and you can't see all of the obstacles in your way because they've never been made clear to you. So let's now start to understand and make clear what these obstacles are. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately about why don't we know? And then it occurred to me that for all of the years at school I spent learning about World War II, I never spent any time learning about gender studies, about society, about equality. There is no education in equality that helps people understand how the world has been structured for the last 10,000 years. So when you are 25 and, like every woman who came before you, you start that process of self-actualization. What you're doing is trying to create or build things with only social media level feminism in your toolkit. So unless you studied liberal arts or gender studies or anything like that, you're typically not going to have read classic feminist library. So you're 25 years old and you just see a caption of a bell hooks quote or, something by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and you're like, yeah, you go girl, I can do it too. And then, between 25 and like 30, and you start to get more curious about these texts, you might actually read one of the books. You might actually read The Second Sex and be like, hang on a minute, when was this written? It sounds the same today. What the hell? Which is what the impetus for my book was. I read Virginia Woolf, A Room of One's Own, when I was like 32. And I was reading it thinking, when was this written? And I flipped to the front of the book and I was like, 1928, what the hell? I was like, this is crazy because this is exactly how I feel. And for me to be in my big old age and be reading that for the first time is actually quite shameful when you think someone like me who's been doing work in the women's sphere since I started magazine actually when I was 20 or something. How has all that time gone by and I didn't even know who this person was or what the writing was? So it's not your fault when you didn't know. It's not your fault when you set about trying to make your way in a world that wasn't designed for you, and give yourself a break.
I think that's so important. And everything you said is right, because I mean, I went to a school that was, I'm pretty sure it was the first like educational institute set up for women. And we didn't study any, like, it wasn't like we were at this school and we were, it was pioneering and then they got us to study these texts. We were still reading. I reckon every book we read as part of our like GCSE text and A level was all by men. I can't even remember. Oh no, I mean, obviously there was Jane Austen, but majority of it was male. And it's always that kind of lens that children learn in. And that's why I think it's actually really important that not that we just have texts about women and feminism and how far we've come, but also make it more diverse in terms of cultures. Like everything we learn at school is just one element of the world. And therefore it's kind of unsurprising to me that element, that theme kind of continues throughout into adulthood. Like there's so much that we could be teaching our children, which would make them better citizens. But anyway, back to the book.
Do you know what? I've just, while you were talking, I've always wanted to open a school. And one of my favorite films is Mona Lisa Smile, because that's like my dream scenario. But actually, New Methods for Women is quite a dense book. Like, what would that look like as a children's book, or a book for little girls, or a book whereby we simplify all of the essays in order to help someone who is 7 to 12 years old understand that they have a choice? Because it's the same as me. Almost everything I studied was male, apart from all the boring books. Yet Northanger Abbey, I hated that book. I probably might like it now, but I hated it at school.
When we were talking, also, I was thinking, actually, someone should do a book like this for children, like you said, that can be distilled. Because for me, I read this book and I've never read anything like it. And that's probably partly because I am quite ignorant when it comes to a lot of things. You know, I haven't read a book. Well, maybe I haven't been looking in the right places, but a book that kind of makes me feel empowered by the end. And like I said, maybe I spend a lot of time doing research for interviews. So most of the books I read now are, you know, biographies. But I just think if we had something that children could read that would make them realize who holds the power now and who has the potential to hold the power, that would be really interesting, because I don't think there's anything like that. A couple of other things. One thing that I think is really interesting that you talk about in the book is the difference between goal setting and vision setting. So for people that don't know, how would you differentiate the two?
So goal setting, I see as a list of needs and wants. It's basically a shopping list. You know, I want to achieve this, I want to do that. It's all of the stuff that you are going to accumulate. Whereas I feel like vision setting is building a 360 narrative of what your future looks like. And the reason why I prefer vision setting over goal setting is the way humans tell stories is, if you just told a story of a list of achievements, you know, Sharma walked down the street and then she got this and then she got that and then she achieved this, achieved that. It's not as emotive as, you know, describing your feelings and your thoughts and stepping into a world that you have designed in your mind. So I always think of vision setting as just a richer experience. And whenever I've done it, it always comes true. It's not really saying, you know, I want to get 100K. It's about thinking what that 100K will do for you, how it will change your life, how it will make you feel. And then you might find that actually 70K is enough. And then you're not berating yourself for not achieving that goal of 100K, which is just an arbitrary number. And typically, probably one that you've just heard, you know, amongst your friends and family on the internet. Oh, I'm going to be a millionaire by the time I'm 30. Like, is that really what you want?
Exactly. Okay, I've got two more questions I want to ask you about. Is you said in the book, the work is never done. So I wanted you to explain what you meant by that.
I feel like at each stage in your life, you're growing and developing and plateauing and starting again. And, you know, that the work that I've done in these first 40 years of my life, the majority of it I've now dealt with, but it doesn't mean that I don't have issues and problems. I still have issues and problems. They're just quite different now. You know, I don't have the same anxieties that I did when I was 20, 25, and that's part of the beauty of getting older. But I would say that having this, you know, feeling of, oh, I've made it, you know, I'm okay now, I'm healed. I just think that's a naive way to be, because we can always be lifelong learners and infinite learners and continue on and on down the path of like, am I being the best I can be? Am I really, I don't know, am I being a good human to myself and others? I feel like that's a question that you can work on every day for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. I've interviewed lots of founders where some of them have sold their businesses. And I think not for every founder, but there are certain founders, especially those that have taken on investment, where selling is like the goal. And then once, as in the goal for the business, and then once it's sold, they actually have this awful, like kind of crushing defeat. They're expecting to feel elated, like, oh, I've got millions in the bank and that's it. And actually, and I think this is actually why so many founders go on to set up other businesses, because that wasn't the goal. That was never kind of the plan. And those that seek it are mistaken because it's never exactly how you want it to be. And I think that's a lesson. But my last question, which I ask everyone, we always start at the beginning with your childhood. And I wanted to just go back in time. I know that you said you had a happy childhood, but if you could go back, knowing what you know now, which is impossible, obviously, but if you did, what's one piece of advice that you would give a younger Sharmadean?
The one piece of advice I would give the younger version of myself is to explore what you're curious about, but not everything has to be monetized. You can just do things and treat everything like an art project or an experiment, and effectively continue to make instead of just build.
I love it. Sharmadean, thank you so much for your time today. I have thoroughly enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, same as well. And thanks for all your support. You've always been such a great advocate for what I do. So yeah, I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Sharmadean Reid. And thank you to Sharmadean for sharing her time and inspiring story with us. As always, I want to leave you with a quote, and today it comes from Sharmadean's new book, New Methods for Women. It reads, "So, my new methods, women, do not be afraid to destroy it all and burn it all down. Give open arms to the chaos, the uncertainty and the discomfort that accompany this process. Trust in your own resilience, in your capacity to rebuild and redefine yourself. In the act of destruction, you will find liberation. In the ashes, you will discover the seeds of your own rebirth. And in embracing this transformative journey, you will get closer and closer to that feeling of contentment that you have been seeking all along."